In one of the first scenes of Goodfellas, the camera glides past a heavy-set gangster called Fat Andy. The man playing him was not an actor. He was a real New York police detective, and at that moment, he was secretly working as muscle for the Mafia, tied to 8 people who lost their lives. The movie could not even keep a real criminal out of its own cast. That is the problem with Goodfellas. We treat it as the honest truth about the mob. It is not. It is the cleaned-up version. The real war between the FBI and the Mafia was colder, darker, and stranger than anything Scorsese put on screen. It involved a far higher cost than the film ever showed. Agents and police who became criminals themselves, and bosses who shattered the one code meant to be sacred. Section 1. The airport job and the cleanup that came after. December 11, 1978. A small group of men walked into a cargo building at a New York airport and walked out with close to $6 million in cash and jewels.
At the time, it was the biggest cash grab ever pulled off on American soil. If you have seen Goodfellas, you already know this moment. It sits at the center of the whole film. The crew celebrates, the money flows, and for a little while, everything looks perfect. James Burke was the man behind it. He was an associate of the Lucchese crime family, and everyone called him Jimmy the Gent. In the movie, he is the calm, friendly figure played by Robert De Niro. The real Burke was friendly in the same way a locked door is friendly. He could seem warm right up until the second he decided you were a problem. Here is the part the film shows you, but never really lets you sit with. The robbery was not the dangerous part. The dangerous part was every single person who knew about it. A worker at the airport named Louis Werner started the whole thing. Werner owed money to a bookmaker named Martin Krugman, and to wipe out that debt, he passed along a secret. Enormous amounts of untraceable cash moved through that cargo terminal. Krugman carried the idea to Burke through Henry Hill, the man whose life the movie is built around. So before a single dollar was taken, 3 or 4 people already knew the plan. Burke understood exactly what that meant. Within weeks of the score, the people connected to it began to vanish. Parnell Edwards, nicknamed Stax, was first. His one job was to get rid of the van used in the robbery. He never finished it. The van turned up with fingerprints and other clues still inside. A few days later, Stax was gone. Next came Martin Krugman, the bookmaker who had handed over the tip in the first place. He wanted his share, and he kept asking for it. Loudly. Asking loudly, in Burke's world, was the same as turning into a risk. He disappeared in January 1979 and was never seen again. Through that spring, the list kept growing. Tom Monteleone, a married couple, Louis and Joanna Cafora, a crew member known as Joe Buddha, a man named Robert McMahon, another named Paolo who had been brought in from a different family. By that summer, at least 8 people tied to one robbery were simply gone. Then there is Tommy. In the film, the loud and frightening character played by Joe Pesci is based on a real man named Tommy DeSimone. Airport workers had picked his face out because he pulled his mask off during the job. In January 1979, his wife reported him missing. He was never found. The movie gives Tommy a big, dramatic finish. Real life just left an empty space where a person used to be. Now put the 2 versions next to each other. The film handles all of this in one famous stretch set to music where the missing are discovered one after another, stuffed into cars and trucks. It is shocking, but it moves fast, and then the story rolls on. You barely have time to feel it. The real cleanup took months. It was slow, patient, and personal. Burke was not panicking. He was doing math. Every person who could tie him to that money was a loose thread, and one at a time, he cut them. And it reached back further than the robbery itself. Back in 1969, a man named Paul Katz disappeared. People believed he had been talking to the law. Decades later, long after Goodfellas had come and gone from theaters, investigators tore up the floor of a house once linked to Burke and found cats down there. He had been hidden under concrete and left for more than 40 years. Burke even ran a bar called Robert's Lounge. Henry Hill later said the place served a second purpose, and that more than a dozen people who crossed Burke ended up on that property, out of sight, never officially counted by anyone. So how did the law finally get a grip on any of this? Not through the robbery. Around 1982, Henry Hill was arrested in a separate case involving illegal product.
Staring down serious time, he agreed to work with federal agents. He talked. He gave up names. He explained where people had gone and why they had gone there. The famous airport job that kicks off so many crime stories never put Burke away at all. He was never even charged for it. What finally caught him was getting rid of a man named Richard Eaton, who was found tied up and dumped in a trailer. For that, Burke was sent away for the rest of his life, and he passed away behind bars in 1996. This gap is what the whole video is about. Goodfellas hands you a thrill ride, fast cars, easy money, a wild finish you can enjoy from your couch. The truth is colder and quieter. One robbery quietly wiped out at least 8 people, very likely more, and the man who planned the entire thing walked free of that crime for years. The movie is the highlight reel. What actually happened was a long, careful operation to make sure nobody was left who could ever say a word. But catching a man like Burke from the outside was almost impossible, because everyone who might testify either stayed silent or simply disappeared. So the people hunting the Mafia tried something far more dangerous. They sent one of their own deep inside to live as a criminal for years and bring the truth back in person. What that choice cost the agent who made it is where we go next. Section 2. The man who became a gangster for real. His real name was Joseph Pistone. He was born in 1939, grew up in New Jersey, and joined the FBI in 1969. For most agents, the job means a badge, an office, and a desk you go home from at night. Pistone signed up for something almost nobody else would. In 1976, he walked out of the FBI office, left his own name behind, and became a criminal named Donnie Brasco. He would not come back for years. The cover story was simple. Donnie Brasco was a smooth, low-key jewel thief who knew his way around stolen goods. Pistone built that character slowly. He hung around the right neighborhoods, made the right small talk, and let the right people notice him. One wrong word, one slip, and he was finished. Bit by bit, it worked. He got close to a member of the Bonanno crime family named Benjamin Ruggiero, who everyone called Lefty. In the 1997 movie about all this, Lefty is the older, tired mobster played by Al Pacino. The real Lefty took to Donnie like a student he could teach. He showed him the rules. He vouched for him. He treated him like family. He had no idea he was walking an FBI agent straight through the front door. Think about what that actually meant day to day. Pistone was not playing a role for a few hours and then going home. He was living it. For years, his wife and 3 daughters barely saw him. He missed Christmases. He missed school events, the kind of moments a parent never gets back. His family knew he had a dangerous job, but they could not know the details, and they could not know when or if he was coming home. He lived that double life from 1976 to 1981, close to 6 years, and the deeper he got, the worse the danger became. By 1981, the family trusted Donnie so much that they were ready to make him an official member. That sounds like a win, and in a way it was, but becoming a made man came with a price. To prove himself, Donnie was being pushed toward doing the worst kind of job for the family with his own hands.
That was a line an FBI agent could not cross. The whole point was to gather the truth, not to become the thing he was hunting. So in the summer of 1981, the FBI made the call to pull him out. On July 26th, agents walked up to the mobsters who thought Donnie Brasco was their brother and told them the truth. Their friend was Special Agent Joe Pistone. He had fooled all of them for years, completely. What he carried out of that world was staggering. The information Pistone gathered led to more than 200 charges being filed and over 100 convictions of Mafia members.
One agent on the inside did more damage than entire squads working from the outside. The mob knew it too. Once his real name came out, they put up $500,000 for anyone who could track him down and take care of him. That reward did not come with an expiration date. Pistone had to live with it hanging over him for the rest of his life. There was a cost on the other side too, and this is the part the films can only hint at. Sonny Black Napolitano was the mobster who had vouched for Donnie at the highest level. He had personally promised the bosses that Donnie was solid. When they learned the truth, someone had to answer for letting an agent get that close. Sonny Black was that someone. The bosses held him responsible, and not long after, he was gone for good. His trust in a friend who never existed cost him everything. Lefty was in danger as well, for the same reason. He had brought Donnie in, but before the family could deal with him, federal agents arrested Lefty and took him into custody. In an odd twist, getting locked up may have been the thing that kept him alive. He later passed away from illness in 1995, his name forever tied to the man who tricked him. The damage spread further than the people directly involved. The embarrassment ran so deep that, according to later testimony, the bosses of the other New York families punished the whole Bonanno family for it. They were pushed out of the commission, the small ruling group that sat at the top of the American Mafia. One undercover agent had not only sent men to prison, he had humiliated an entire crime family in front of all the others. Pistone did not come out broken. He always insisted he was the same man going in as he was coming out. He wrote a book about it years later, and in 1992, well into his 50s, he asked to rejoin the FBI as a full agent. They agreed only if he passed the same brutal training as recruits half his age. He did it, and he kept working until the rules forced him to retire. Goodfellas shows you the criminals. It almost never shows you the cost of getting close enough to stop them. Pistone is that cost. Years of a stolen life, a family raised partly without him, a permanent reward offered for his removal, and at least one man gone simply for believing he had a friend. That is the real shape of this war, and the films barely touch it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But even an agent on the inside could only reach so far. The men giving the orders sat above it all, shielded by layers of people who took the fall for them. To reach the bosses themselves, the people chasing the Mafia needed a different kind of weapon. They found one in an old law almost nobody had bothered to use, and they aimed it straight at the top. Section 3. The old law that finally reached the bosses. For decades, the men at the very top of the Mafia had a simple kind of protection. They never got their own hands dirty. A boss did not rob the airport. A boss did not deal with the people who needed to disappear. He gave an order, somebody far below him carried it out, and if anyone got caught, it was that somebody, never the boss. The law could only charge a man for a crime he personally committed, so the bosses stayed clean on paper while running everything underneath. That was the wall investigators kept slamming into. They knew exactly who the bosses were. They just could not prove a thing. The tool that finally broke the wall had been sitting around, mostly ignored, since 1970. It was a law with a long name, usually shortened to RICO.
For about 10 years, almost nobody used it the right way. The head of the FBI later admitted they had it for nearly a decade before figuring out what to do with it. Here is what made RICO different, in plain terms. The old way went after one person for one crime. RICO went after the whole organization. If you helped run a criminal group, you could be held responsible for what that group did, including crimes you never touched yourself. Suddenly, giving the orders was not a safe place to stand. Being the boss became the evidence against you. A Genovese boss named Frank Thierry was the first to feel it. In 1980, he became the first Mafia boss convicted specifically as the head of a criminal enterprise. That was the warning shot. The real earthquake came a few years later. In 1985, the top federal prosecutor in New York, Rudy Giuliani, did something that had never been done. He did not go after one boss, he went after all of them at once. He charged the heads of the 5 main New York crime families in a single case. His goal was blunt. He wanted to wipe the families out. The case became known as the Commission Trial, and the name matters. For years, regular people assumed the idea of a national board of crime bosses was a myth, something out of a film. Giuliani set out to prove it was real. The commission was an actual ruling group, a small set of bosses who met to settle arguments between families, approve big decisions, and run organized crime almost the way a company runs its business. Proving it existed was half the fight. The proof came from patient, unglamorous work. The FBI planted listening devices in the places the bosses felt safest, including a social club where they spoke freely. Years earlier, agents had recorded a man named Ralph Scopo squeezing payments out of construction companies. Recording by recording, the government built a picture of how the families divided money, handed out contracts, and signed off on their worst decisions. The bosses had talked openly because they were sure no one could hear them. They were wrong. The charges read like a summary of everything the Mafia did: shaking down honest businesses, controlling labor unions through fear, ordering people removed when they became a problem. These were not small-time street crimes. This was the leadership of organized crime in America, sitting together in one courtroom. The trial ended on November 19, 1986. The jury convicted 8 men. Among them were some of the most powerful figures in the country. Anthony Salerno, the acting boss of the Genovese family, known as Fat Tony. Anthony Corallo, boss of the Lucchese family, called Tony Ducks. And Carmine Persico, boss of the Colombo family. These were not foot soldiers. These were the kings. Then came the sentences, and they were crushing. In January 1987, most of the convicted men were given 100 years in prison, the most the law allowed. For men already in their 60s and 70s, that meant they would never walk free again. Several of them, including Salerno, Corallo, and Persico, later passed away in prison. The men who had spent their whole lives staying clean on paper ended up behind bars anyway. Step back and look at what happened here. Goodfellas shows you the bottom of the ladder. Henry Hill, Jimmy Burke, the guys doing robberies and slipping away into the night. The movie never shows you the top, because the top almost never showed itself. The commission trial dragged those invisible men into the open and proved, using their own recorded words, that they had been running a nationwide operation for years. Then it locked them away with a single law most people had never heard of. This is the side of the war the films cannot capture. It was not the dramatic action movie stuff. It was years of listening, recording, and reading through paperwork until the structure of the entire Mafia was laid out like a map. Once that map existed, the idea that a boss could hide behind the men below him was finished for good. But proving the bosses ran an organization was only one piece of the puzzle. The bigger question was how that organization pulled in so much money in the first place. The answer had been hiding in plain sight, inside ordinary shops on ordinary streets across America. And right around the time of the commission trial, a separate case was about to reveal just how enormous that hidden business really was. Section 4. The billion-dollar secret behind the pizza counter. Picture a small pizza shop on a normal American street. A family runs it. The smell of dough fills the air. Kids stop in after school. It looks like the most ordinary business in the world. Now imagine that some of those shops were not really in the pizza business at all. They were the front end of one of the largest illegal product operations the country had ever seen. This is the case that became known as the Pizza Connection, and the scale of it is hard to wrap your head around.
For about 9 years, from the mid-1970s into the mid-1980s, the Sicilian Mafia and their partners in the American families ran a pipeline that moved a deadly illegal product across the world and into the United States. The raw material came from overseas and was refined into its finished form in Sicily. Then it was moved in secret, sometimes hidden inside cans of tomatoes, all the way to shops in places like New York, Illinois, and Wisconsin. From behind the counter, it was sold. The cash was then cleaned through banks and businesses until it looked completely legal, and sent back overseas to start the cycle again. The total amount of product pushed through this network was worth around $1.6 billion. Not million, billion. This was not a few guys with a stash in the trunk of a car. This was a global business with suppliers, shippers, salesmen, and accountants, all hidden behind the friendliest storefront you can imagine. Here is why this matters for our story. If you have seen Goodfellas, you know the drug part of the film. Henry Hill in his final days, sweating, paranoid, glancing at the sky for helicopters, running a frantic little operation out of his house. The movie makes that world feel small and chaotic. The Pizza Connection shows you the truth behind that feeling. The real operation was not small. It was enormous, organized, and patient. And it had been running quietly for years, while families ate dinner in the very shops it used as cover. Cracking it took an effort to match its size. The investigation pulled in agents from several countries. By the time it reached court, the government had recorded an astonishing number of secret conversations, tens of thousands of them. They had prints lifted from product that undercover agents had bought directly. They lined up around 300 witnesses. One important thread traced back to a name you already know from earlier. The undercover work of Agent Joe Pistone, the man who lived for years as Donnie Brasco, helped point investigators toward this very network in the first place. There was another key figure, a Sicilian insider named Tommaso Buscetta. Buscetta was not part of the pizza scheme himself, but he did something almost no one in his world ever did. He broke the code of silence. He sat down and explained how the Mafia actually worked, its rules, its ranks, and how the families controlled everything. For investigators trying to prove that all these scattered pieces were really one organization, his explanation was gold. The trial began in late 1985 and did not end until March of 1987. It ran for about 17 months, which made it the longest criminal jury trial in American history at the time. 17 months in a single courtroom, sorting through mountains of recordings and testimony, all to prove one hidden business. The men at the top did not escape. Gaetano Badalamenti, a powerful Sicilian boss, and Salvatore Catalano, who ran the American end and owned a bakery in Queens, each received 45 years in prison. In total, 18 people were convicted. The pipeline that had quietly flooded the country for nearly a decade was shut down. And here is a detail that tells you exactly how dangerous these people were, even with the whole world watching. During the trial itself, one of the defendants was removed for good. He did not make it to a verdict. Another man connected to the case was attacked and nearly lost his life. These men were on trial, under the brightest spotlight in the country, and still willing to make a problem disappear. That is how fiercely they protected their secrets. Think about what this case really exposed. The Mafia in the movies is often about loyalty, family dinners, and street corner toughness. The Pizza Connection showed a colder reality. These families were running an international business that pushed a harmful product into ordinary American towns by the ton, and they were doing it through the most innocent-looking shops on the block. The danger was not just in dark alleys. It was sitting right there in the middle of everyday life, behind a warm oven and a friendly hello. It was also a turning point. After the network was broken, the flow of that product coming in from overseas dropped sharply. It proved the families were not invincible. Even their biggest, best-hidden money machines could be found, taken apart, and shut down piece by piece. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But money was only one side of the Mafia. The other side was muscle. And keeping a secret that valuable meant making sure certain people never talked. One crew took that job and turned the act of making people vanish into something disturbingly close to a business of its own, run out of the back of an ordinary neighborhood bar. Section 5. The crew that made people disappear for a living. Roy DeMeo grew up in Brooklyn and, as a young man, trained to work cutting meat. That same calm skill with a blade would later make him one of the most feared figures in the entire American Mafia. By his teens, he was already lending money on the street and collecting it by force. A Gambino crime family captain named Nino Gaggi noticed him, took him under his wing, and pulled him into the family. DeMeo built his own crew, and that crew became something the Mafia had never quite seen before. Most Mafia stories in the movies show this kind of thing as personal and messy. Someone loses their temper, things boil over, chaos follows. The DeMeo crew was the opposite of messy. They were calm, organized, and horrifyingly efficient. They treated the worst job in the underworld like a routine, something you clocked in for and did the same way every time. The center of it all was a bar DeMeo owned in Brooklyn called the Gemini Lounge. To the neighborhood, it looked like any other local watering hole, but next to the bar sat an apartment, and that apartment was where the crew did its real work. People were lured there and never walked out. The crew had a step-by-step process for making sure that anyone they got rid of was never found. No trace, nothing for investigators to recover or build a case around. Authors who later studied the crew gave that process a name, and the name alone tells you how cold it was. They called it the Gemini method. Because of that method, no one can say for certain how many people the crew made disappear. The FBI suspected the DeMeo crew was responsible for at least 70 over a roughly 10-year stretch, from the early 1970s into the early 1980s.
Some researchers believe the real number is far higher.
Think about how disturbing that is.
With most crimes, you at least know the count. With this crew, the whole point was that the number could never be known. The people were simply gone, as if they had never existed. The crew was not only about getting rid of people. They also ran one of the biggest car theft operations in New York history, lifting thousands of vehicles and shipping them overseas to buyers in other countries. So this was a full criminal business, stealing on an industrial scale on one side, and on the other, a service for making problems permanently disappear. That service was so reliable that the Gambino family used it whenever something needed to be erased. And the crew was not loyal even to its own. When one of their members got tangled up with dangerous foreign criminals over an illegal product deal and created a situation that could have started a war, The family decided he had become a risk.
The crew got rid of him too.
Loyalty did not protect you. Usefulness did, and only for as long as it lasted. Here is the detail that shows how frightening these men were. So many people had vanished after last being seen near the Gemini Lounge that the FBI began watching the place and following the trail of the missing. The pressure became a problem for the Gambino boss at the time, Paul Castellano, who decided DeMeo had to go to take the spotlight off the family. But there was a catch. Castellano struggled to find anyone willing to do it. DeMeo was surrounded by an army of dangerous men, and even hardened members of the Mafia were scared to come near him. The man whose whole job was to frighten everyone had become too frightening to touch. The FBI was closer than DeMeo realized. Agents had planted a listening device in the home of a Gambino member, and through it, they actually heard the family discussing the plan to get rid of DeMeo and how hard it was to find someone brave enough.
In one of those recorded talks, it came up that DeMeo himself was tied to at least 38 disappearances, a number that dwarfed even other notorious members of the family. The Bureau sat quietly, listening to the Mafia plan to remove one of its own. In the end, the family solved its problem from the inside. On January 10, 1983, Roy DeMeo was found in the trunk of his own car in a Brooklyn parking lot. The man who had made so many people vanish was disposed of by the very people he had worked alongside for years. He lived by making others disappear, and he was discarded the same cold way. There is one last detail that sticks with people. The building that once held the Gemini Lounge still stands in Brooklyn today. After everything that happened inside it, the place was eventually turned into a church. Now line this up against the movies again. Goodfellas gives you scary, hot-tempered moments, the kind that explode out of nowhere. The DeMeo crew shows you something far more chilling. Not rage, but routine. Not chaos, but a system. This is the part of the Mafia the films flinch away from, because there is nothing thrilling or cool about it. Only an assembly line built for making human beings disappear. But as disturbing as the DeMeo crew was, they were still criminals doing criminal things, and you could at least tell which side they were on. The darkest chapter of this whole war is different. It is the moment a trusted federal agent and a feared Mafia enforcer became partners, and people ended up gone because of it. Section 6. The Agent and the Enforcer. Up to this point, the FBI has been the side closing in. The agents listen, record, build cases, and slowly take the Mafia apart. That is the version of the story most people know, and for the most part, it is true. But there is another version, a darker one, and it starts with a simple, ugly question. What happens when the people hunting the Mafia decide that to catch criminals, they need to keep a criminal of their own? Meet Gregory Scarpa. He was a captain in the Colombo crime family and, by reputation, one of the most feared men in it. He was the family's enforcer, the person sent when a problem needed to be dealt with for good. Estimates of how many people he was responsible for over his life vary, but they are staggering. Some put the number at around 80. People inside the FBI believed it could be well over 100. By any count, he was among the most dangerous men the New York Mafia ever produced. And here is the twist that makes this case so disturbing. For much of his life, Gregory Scarpa was also working for the FBI. He had first started passing information to federal agents back in the 1960s. Decades earlier, he had reportedly even helped them on a major case down south, which shows just how long the Bureau had leaned on him. He drifted away from that arrangement for a while. Then, in 1980, an FBI agent named Lindley DeVecchio, known as Lynn, decided he wanted Scarpa back. The story goes that DeVecchio drove straight up to Scarpa's home, blocked his car in the driveway, and made his pitch in person. Scarpa agreed. From then on, DeVecchio was his handler. What grew between them was not a normal, careful relationship between an agent and an informant. It became close. Too close. DeVecchio reportedly sat down for meals with Scarpa and his family. According to later accusations, Scarpa handed his handler cash, jewelry, and gifts over the years, including, one Christmas, a hard-to-find toy for DeVecchio's daughter. The FBI, for its part, paid Scarpa well over $100,000 across the years he worked for them. Now, hold both facts in your head at once. The FBI was paying Gregory Scarpa for information, and during those same years, he never stopped being who he was. He stayed an active, working enforcer for the Colombo family the entire time he was on the federal payroll. It got worse during a period in the early 1990s when the Colombo family tore itself apart in a power struggle. Two sides fought for control, and Scarpa was right in the middle of it. Here is the accusation that turned a bad arrangement into a full scandal. Investigators and lawyers later claimed that DeVecchio was feeding Scarpa inside information, the names of rivals and people who might be talking, and that Scarpa used that information to hunt down and remove his enemies. If that is true, it means a federal agent was not just protecting a dangerous man. He was helping to point that man at his targets. The whole secret arrangement finally came into the light in 1995, when Scarpa's role as an informant was exposed during a trial. By then, Scarpa himself was gone. He had passed away from an illness in 1994. But the questions about his handler did not go away. In 2006, Lynn DeVecchio was arrested and accused of playing a part in 4 people losing their lives. The claim was that the information he passed to Scarpa had led to those deaths. For an FBI agent who had spent his career helping to bring down the New York Mafia, it was a stunning fall. The trial that followed in 2007 was supposed to settle it, but it did not end the way the people who built the case hoped. The whole prosecution leaned on one witness, Scarpa's longtime girlfriend, who said she had heard DeVecchio feed Scarpa names. Then 2 journalists came forward with old recordings of that same woman from years earlier. On those tapes, she had told a different story. Her account fell apart, and without her, the case fell apart with it. Prosecutors dropped the charges. When it happened, former FBI agents in the courtroom actually applauded. So DeVecchio was never found guilty, and he always insisted he did nothing wrong. That has to be said clearly and fairly. But the story does not end clean. A federal judge later made his own view plain. His belief was that DeVecchio had passed information that led to people losing their lives, and he found it troubling that the agent simply walked away and went back to quiet work for the Bureau. Here is what nobody really disputes, no matter which side they take. The FBI knowingly kept a prolific, active enforcer on its payroll for years, while he continued doing the worst things a person can do. They paid him, they protected him, and the people chasing the Mafia decided that getting information was worth letting a man like that keep operating. That is not the clean, heroic FBI from the movies. That is something far murkier. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And as troubling as the Scarpa case was, it ended in arguments and dropped charges with no clear verdict. In another American city, the very same kind of deal was running at the same time, only bigger and dirtier. In that case, there would be no doubt about what happened because an FBI agent would end up in prison for it. Section 7. The friendship that let a boss get away with everything. To understand how bad this gets, you have to start with 2 boys from the same corner of South Boston. They grew up in the same tough neighborhood. One of them, James Bulger, everyone called him Whitey, went one direction and became the most powerful figure in the Boston underworld. The other, John Connolly, went the other direction and became an FBI agent. Their paths should never have crossed again. Instead,
They made a deal that would poison the Boston FBI office for years. Starting in the 1970s, Connolly signed Bulger up as an informant. On paper, this looked like good police work. Bulger would feed the FBI information about its biggest target in the area, the Italian Mafia.
In return, Connolly would look the other way on Bulger's own activities and, more than that, warn him whenever investigators were getting close. For the FBI, the trade seemed worth it. Using the information Bulger and his partner provided, agents helped take apart the Italian Mafia in Boston and New England. Connolly later defended the deal in blunt terms, saying that informants like Bulger were never going to be saints, and that trading two criminals to destroy an entire crime family was a deal anyone would take. Here is the problem with that thinking. While the FBI was protecting Whitey Bulger, Bulger was not slowing down. He was building one of the most feared criminal operations in the country. He ran the rackets, moved illegal product, and left a long trail of people behind him who crossed him and were never seen again. The whole time, an FBI agent was making sure no one could touch him. With that protection, Bulger quite literally got away with the worst crimes a person can commit. It went even further than looking the other way. In 1982, a businessman named John Callahan became a danger to Bulger and his partner because he knew things that could expose them. According to the case against Connolly, the agent warned the gang that Callahan was a risk. Soon after, Callahan was found in the trunk of a car at the Miami airport, his life ended by one of the gang's enforcers. A man lost his life because an FBI agent passed along a name. Only this time, unlike the last section, it would be proven in a courtroom. The corruption was not just one rogue agent either. Connolly's own supervisor was also taking money from Bulger. The rot had spread up the chain, and the Boston office protected the arrangement instead of stopping it. People who worked these cases honestly later said the worst part was watching the rules apply to everyone except the people who were supposed to enforce them. Then came 1994. Federal investigators were finally closing in on Bulger, preparing to arrest him. But before they could, Connolly tipped him off. Bulger packed up and vanished. And here is the part that makes this worse than a movie. Bulger did not slip away for a few weeks. He stayed gone for about 16 years. He landed on the FBI's most wanted list, right alongside the most hunted people in the world, all because one of the FBI's own agents had handed him a head start. Bulger was not caught until 2011, when he was finally found living quietly in an apartment in Santa Monica, California, with his longtime girlfriend. Hidden inside the walls of that apartment was more than $800,000 in cash. A man the FBI had spent years claiming to hunt had been living off a fortune the whole time, protected first by a crooked agent and then by his own careful hiding. The truth eventually came out, and unlike the case before this one, this story ended with real consequences. John Connolly was convicted. In 2002, he was found guilty of racketeering and of blocking justice. Then, in 2008, he was convicted again, this time for his role in the death of John Callahan, and sentenced to 40 years. An FBI agent, a man who had carried the badge for over 2 decades, ended up in prison as a criminal himself. He was eventually released on compassionate grounds in 2021. Bulger faced his own reckoning. In 2013, he was found guilty in connection with 11 deaths, along with a long list of other crimes, and sent away for the rest of his life. His ending was grim. In 2018, soon after arriving at a federal prison in West Virginia, he was attacked by other inmates and did not survive. Now think about what this story does to the picture most people carry in their heads. In the movies, the FBI is the clean, determined force that finally brings the bad guys down. Goodfellas sells you that image. The Bulger case takes that image and tears it in half. Here, the FBI was not closing in on the boss. The FBI was his shield. An agent protected him, warned him, helped him escape, and, by the court's finding, helped cause a man's death. The line between the law and the criminals did not just blur. In Boston, for years, it disappeared completely. That is what makes this the darkest stretch of the entire war so far. But the rot was not limited to the FBI. It had crept into local police too, where two decorated detectives did not just leak secrets to the Mafia. They did the family's dirtiest work themselves, all while wearing the badge.
Section 8. The detectives who worked for the other side. There is a scene early in Goodfellas where Henry Hill walks through a club and introduces the crew. The camera glides past a row of gangsters with colorful nicknames. One of them is a heavy-set man called Fat Andy. Most people watch that scene and never think twice about him. But here is the detail that should stop you cold. The man playing Fat Andy was not an actor. He was a real New York City police detective named Louis Ippolito. And at the time he stepped in front of the camera to play a pretend gangster, he was secretly working as a real one. Let that sink in. The very movie this whole video keeps comparing reality to could not even keep a real criminal out of its own cast. Ippolito came from a family deep in the mob. His father was tied to the Gambino crime family, and so were other relatives. When Ippolito joined the NYPD in 1969, he told them he had no mob connections, which was a lie. He rose through the ranks anyway and became a detective. His partner was another detective named Stephen Caracappa, a man who had helped build a special police unit whose entire job was to investigate organized crime. In other words, Caracappa was supposed to be hunting the Mafia. Instead, the two of them went to work for it. Their boss in the underworld was a Lucchese crime family leader named Anthony Casso, known as Gaspipe. The detectives did not deal with him directly. They used a middleman to pass messages and money back and forth. And the money was steady. Casso paid them around $4,000 a month just for a flow of police secrets, and far more when he wanted something specific done. In all, the two detectives took in roughly $375,000. For that money, they sold everything a corrupt cop could sell. They handed over the names of informants, the people quietly helping the police, which put those people in terrible danger. They tipped the mob off about investigations. They used their police access to find people the family wanted to reach. And then they crossed the worst line of all. These were not just officers leaking paperwork. The two detectives took part in the family's most serious jobs themselves, helping to end the lives of people Casso wanted gone. By the time it was all counted, they were tied to 8 people who lost their lives. One of those cases is almost too painful to repeat. In 1986, Casso wanted to reach a man named Nicholas Guido. The detectives used their police tools to track down an address, but they got the wrong man. On Christmas Day, an innocent young man who happened to share that name lost his life outside his home, for no reason other than a terrible mix-up made by 2 police officers selling their badge. He had nothing to do with the mob at all. For years, they got away with it. Casso actually named the 2 detectives back in 1994 when he started cooperating with the government. But at first, nobody could build a solid case. Ippolito was hardly even hiding. He wrote a book about growing up around the mob and moved out to Las Vegas to chase a movie career. It still took about another decade to catch them. Finally, the middleman who had carried the money agreed to talk, and his account gave investigators the witness they needed. In March 2005, agents arrested the 2 retired detectives in Las Vegas. In 2006, a jury convicted them of an enormous list of crimes, including their role in 8 people losing their lives, plus moving illegal product, cleaning dirty money, and selling police secrets to the mob. One prosecutor called it the worst betrayal of the badge the city had ever seen. The road to a final sentence had a strange twist. A judge agreed the men were guilty, but at one point threw out the main charge on a technical point about time limits. An appeals court later put the conviction back in place. In 2009, both men were sentenced to life in prison for good, with dozens of additional years stacked on top. Eppolito, the cop who once played a gangster on the big screen, passed away in prison in 2019. The damage did not stop with the people directly harmed. Eppolito had also helped frame an innocent man for a crime, and that man sat in prison for 19 years for something he did not do. When the truth finally came out, the city was forced to pay out tens of millions of dollars over the wreckage these two detectives left behind. Now step back and feel the full weight of this one. The earlier sections showed the FBI keeping dangerous men on the payroll and protecting them. This is harder to accept. These were not informants the police merely tolerated. These were the police. Two decorated detectives, trusted, promoted, and handed badges and authority by the city, chose to become the Mafia's own muscle.
They used the very tools meant to protect the public to help the family hunt people down. If the FBI cases blurred the line between the law and the mob, this one rubbed it out completely. There is no version of the clean, heroic cop here, only a uniform worn by men doing the underworld's dirtiest work. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And remember how this section started, with one of these men bold enough to act in a hit movie about the very world he secretly served. That same belief that no one could ever touch them ran all the way to the top of the Mafia. No boss wore it more loudly than a man in New York who smiled for the cameras and treated his power like fame, certain he was untouchable, right up until the FBI proved him wrong. Section 9. The Untouchable Boss and the Tapes That Sank Him. By the late 1980s, John Gotti was the most famous gangster in America, and he loved every second of it. He ran the Gambino crime family, the biggest of the New York families. He wore $1,000 suits, got his hair done perfectly, and smiled for the cameras like a movie star whenever he walked into court. He did not hide from the spotlight. He performed for it. And for a while, it looked like nothing could touch him. The government took him to trial 3 separate times in the 1980s, and 3 times he walked out a free man. The newspapers gave him a nickname that stuck, the Teflon Don, because no charge ever seemed to stick to him. What the public did not fully know was why. At least one of those wins came because his people had quietly reached a member of the jury. He was not just lucky. He was cheating the system in plain sight. That arrogance is exactly what brought him down. Gotti had a headquarters, a social club in Little Italy called the Ravenite. Starting in 1988, he ordered his top men to come meet him there every single week. His own underboss thought this was a foolish risk, a way of putting all the family's leaders in one easy-to-watch spot. But Gotti liked holding court. He liked being seen as the king on his throne. The FBI noticed. At first, the bugs in the club itself did not catch much, because Gotti was careful. But agents figured out his trick. When he wanted to talk about real business, he would slip upstairs to an apartment above the club, or step into a back hallway, believing those spots were safe. So, in late 1989, the FBI bugged those places too. And that is where Gotti finally talked himself into prison. The apartment recordings were a disaster for him. Free and relaxed, sure no one could hear, Gotti talked openly. He talked about the inner workings of the family and about people he had ordered removed, saying things out loud that he would later deny under oath. In total, the FBI gathered around 600 hours of his conversations. They would only need a small slice. The recordings stopped in early 1990 after someone tipped Gotti off, but by then the damage was done. The tapes existed.
In December 1990, agents arrested Gotti along with his underboss and another top man. This time, the government was determined not to let him slip away. The judge took an unusual step and kept the jury anonymous, known only by numbers with no names made public. After all the times his people had gotten to juries before, the one trick that had saved him was now off the table. Then came the part that truly ended him, and it came from inside his own family. His underboss was a man named Salvatore Gravano, known as Sammy the Bull. Gravano had been Gotti's right hand, the man who handled the family's worst work, with a role in 19 people losing their lives over his career. He was as deep in it as anyone. But when Gravano heard those secret recordings, something changed. On the tapes, Gotti was talking about him behind his back, complaining about him, and shifting the blame for past crimes onto Gravano's shoulders. The loyalty was supposed to run both ways. Gravano realized his boss was setting him up to take the fall. So Sammy the Bull did the thing the Mafia feared most. He flipped. In 1991, he agreed to cooperate with the government and testify against his own boss. For the prosecution, he was the dream witness. Gravano did not just confirm the tapes. He sat in court and explained the entire hidden world from the inside, naming names and laying out how the family really worked. On April 2, 1992, the verdict came in. Gotti was found guilty on all 13 counts against him, including ordering people removed, running a criminal enterprise, and blocking justice. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of release. The man who had beaten the system 3 times and laughed about it was finished. One FBI official summed it up perfectly, joking that the Teflon Don was now covered in Velcro, because this time, every charge stuck. Gotti was sent away and passed away in prison in 2002 after an illness. And Gravano, the man with a hand in 19 deaths, in exchange for bringing down the most famous boss in America, he served only about 5 years before entering witness protection. Sit with that trade. 19 lives gone, 5 years served. That is how badly the government wanted the boss. And that is how completely the old code had broken. Look at what this case really showed. Goodfellas ends with its world quietly fading out in the early 1980s, just an informant disappearing into a new life. It never shows you the moment the most powerful boss of the next era got taken down, not in a blaze of action, but by sheer patience. The FBI did not kick down a door. They sat quietly and let an arrogant man convict himself, then let his own most trusted partner finish the job. The code of silence the movies treat as sacred was shattered at the very top. But as shocking as it was that a boss could be brought down by his own underboss, the Mafia was about to face something even more unthinkable. A few years later, in another New York family, it would not be the number 2 man who broke. It would be the boss himself. Section 10. The last Don who broke the code. Everything the movies love about the Mafia comes down to one idea: the code. The promise that no matter what happens, you keep your mouth shut and protect the family. And above everyone else, the boss is the one who lives and dies by it. The boss takes the weight. The boss never talks. That is the legend Goodfellas and every gangster film sells you. This is the story of the man who proved that legend was a lie. His name was Joseph Massino, and he ran the Bonanno crime family. People called him Big Joey. By the early 2000s, he had earned another title too, one that sounds like something out of a film: The Last Don. He got that name because he was, quite literally, the last one standing. The bosses of every other major New York family were already behind bars. Massino alone was still free, still in charge, ruling for years while his rivals sat in prison. He earned his spot the hard way. The Bonanno family had been wrecked years earlier, partly because of the Donnie Brasco disaster from earlier in this story. Massino slowly rebuilt it into a force again. He was careful, too. He was so worried about hidden microphones that he told his men never to say his name out loud. Instead, when they meant him, they would just tug their own ear. He thought of everything. But the FBI had learned some lessons of its own. Instead of only chasing him with the usual methods, they brought in agents who followed the money, tracing where his cash came from and where it went.
Slowly, patiently, they built a case that even the careful last Don could not slip out of. In January 2003, Massino was arrested on a sweeping set of charges. And one of those charges reached all the way back into this story. He was accused of ordering the removal of Sonny Black, the very man who had vouched for the undercover agent Donnie Brasco years earlier, and paid for that mistake with his life. The undercover work from decades before had come full circle, landing as a charge against the boss himself. Then came the betrayals, and they cut deep. Massino's own brother-in-law, a former top man in the family, agreed to cooperate and testify against him. He was not alone. Around 8 different members and associates took the stand to talk. The family Massino had spent his life protecting was now lining up to bury him. In July 2004, the jury found him guilty on every count, including ordering people removed. Here is where Massino made history, in the worst possible way for the Mafia. He was facing the harshest punishment the federal government can hand down, one that could cost him his own life. And in that moment, the last Don, the man who was supposed to embody the code more than anyone, made his choice. He asked to speak with the judge, and he flipped. Joseph Massino became the first sitting boss of a New York crime family in history to turn around and cooperate with the government. Think about how big that is. For decades, the whole system rested on the belief that the man at the top would never talk. Soldiers went to prison for life rather than say a word because the boss set the example. Massino shattered it. If the boss himself would talk to save his own skin, the code was not sacred. It was just a story the foot soldiers told themselves, while the men at the top did whatever kept them alive. And he did not stop at simply talking. While he was locked up, Massino agreed to do something no boss had ever done. He wore a hidden recording device to capture his own successor, the man who had taken over the family. On those recordings, the new acting boss admitted to having a man removed not long before and floated a plan to do the same to a federal prosecutor. The boss of the family had become a secret tool of the FBI, gathering evidence against his own people from a prison cell. The results were staggering. Massino's cooperation helped the government convict more than 90 members and associates of the Bonanno family. One man at the top, deciding to talk, did more damage to a crime family than years of street investigations ever could. He was eventually moved into witness protection. It was the clearest proof yet that the Mafia's greatest weapon, its silence, was finished. Step back and feel the size of this. Goodfellas treats the code as something almost holy, a thing real men would never break. The Massino case burns that idea down. This was not a weak soldier cracking under pressure. This was the king himself handing the FBI the keys to the kingdom. And after him, no one in that world could fully trust anyone again. Here is what the movies never tell you. The war was never truly won. On a single morning in January 2011, decades after Goodfellas fades to black, the FBI fanned out across the Northeast with hundreds of agents and arrested around 127 members and associates in one sweep, the largest single-day strike against organized crime in American history.
Every major New York family was targeted, along with others beyond the city. The Mafia was weakened, not erased. That is the truth Goodfellas leaves out. The real fight against these families was longer, larger, and far darker than 2 hours on a screen could ever hold. And it was still being fought long after the credits rolled. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.